Welcome back to Take a Leap and Transform, a Neurodiversity journey. I'm your host, Joseph K. Muscat. Are you ready to take a leap with me? One of the topics and professions that I truly wanted to cover this season is human resources. I wanted to talk to an HR professional to share their knowledge and experience and vision for the future, particularly on the topic, of course, of neurodiversity in the workplace. It's important to touch upon this as often than not, HR is the professional department to go to with anything and everything for employees and their relationship with managers, employers, and businesses overall. This is why I am pleased to welcome Hilda Gan. Hilda Gan is the founder and Chief Visionary Officer of People Bright Consulting, an international best-selling author, motivational speaker, leadership and team trainer, the creator of Rev Up Your Potential, and a Fascination Certified Advisor. Her company provides HR consulting services and people leadership skills and team building training. She is the advocate and provides training in DEI. With a diverse career in nursing, IT, engineering, and HR, Hilda combines 25 years of HR with a serial entrepreneurial pragmatic eye for business strategy. In the late 90s, she and her husband built iTrans Consulting, an award-winning national engineering firm recognized as the best workplace in Canada, top 10 twice, and finalized in Canadian's best managed company at iTrans. She developed human resources needs for companies from inception. This includes establishing a positive, engaging work culture and learning environment that includes manager training, mentor and coaching program in iTrans University. As a Fascination Certified Advisor, she helps individuals embrace their uniqueness and gain confidence to become the best vision of themselves. Welcome, Hilda.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm so glad to be here, and I look forward to the conversation we're going to have about neurodiversity.
Well, thank you. So let's start off. Your bio is quite in depth, and so I want to still build upon that. With your history and experience in businesses and HR, can you share with us how this came to be?
Well, as I said, I have a diverse career, and I started my career in nursing because I always wanted to help people. And when I was in high school, I thought, okay, I love science, but I love to help people. So how can I combine these two interests and skills that I have? And so nursing became just perfect. It seemed like the right fit. And so for the early part of my career, I was helping people. And particularly, I ended up in ICU. So helping people and families going through crisis. Because when you're in an ICU, it's a very traumatic area. And fast forward, I ended up in management and education in these areas. My husband decided he wanted to start a business. And my skill sets lent themselves very well to a business world. I just basically took all the things that I'd done in the healthcare and I transferred that into an engineering environment. And it was the journey that I loved the most. I said of all the jobs I had before that, the job I loved the most was as manager of ICU because I loved hiring people, I loved working with people and improving quality and education. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm just going to be doing that in an engineering environment since I never looked back. Then when we sold the business, I thought of all the things I did from an operational perspective, what do I want to do now? And it was the human resources side, that connection of people, watching people grow and helping people to feel valued in their organization, regardless of their unique abilities and skills. And that's how I came to build my own business and create this concept of Rev Up.
Fantastic. With your fascination, well, that's the wrong word, with your passion, should I say, for HR and for what you built with your and your husband's company, I would like to ask you, what is and what do you see is the role of human resources?
The role of human resources is really to help create an environment where people love what they do and love where they work. I think that, and as the HR person, you are sort of that intermediary. You're the intermediary for, business wants to make money and they need people. Staff want to have money to live with their income, but they want it to be a place that they feel safe, they feel included. And oftentimes HR, some people are not good at finding that right balance and creating a respect that HR is there to help. Some companies will say, "Oh, you don't care about the employee. You're with the management." And other companies will say, "Oh, well, you're worried about the employees and you're not covering management." And so a good HR person is the bridge. Management will respect the fact that they support management, but they also advocate for the staff. And staff would say, "We understand, you understand us, you're supporting us, but you also need to, we respect that you have to be supportive of HR, of admin." So finding that right balance, not everybody can do that. And I pride myself on being able to be that person that is respected by both groups and that we're in it together. An ideal company creates what I call a we culture. And that's how my husband and I came to be recognized as the best workplaces in Canada. The award is based on recognition of those companies where the management and the staff are working together, and the gap between the perception of working together is less in those best workplaces. I call it a we culture instead of an us versus them. When you have a we culture, then you are creating a best workplaces.
That's really interesting, and you've painted quite a picture there. In particular, there seems to be, depending on the organization, depending on the leadership, there's this conflict that's going on, that where HR seems to be stuck in the middle, and the employees unfortunately, I guess the word I'm looking for is fall victim to that situation, where they're for the employer or they're for the employee, and there's this constant tug of war of conflict going on. That if, depending on the HR, if they can find that balance or even advocate for that balance, it seems to be quite a challenging role. And I like what you said there, that it's their job to be the bridge, to find the balance, and to create that we culture between those two, what seems to be two opposing groups, where in actuality it's one whole organism.
And when you look at studies, when you look at like articles in magazines, they'll tell you those companies where they look at people and profit equally, or business operations equally, those actually have statistically higher sales and higher profits than those companies who just look at the bottom line and the employees are considered a commodity, an ends to a means, rather than a product of creating the ends to the means, right? And when you read articles from Forbes and Times, and when you look at some of the statistics out there, that's what it says. I think in Forbes it says 10 times more profit than those that are just focused on the bottom line, and 10 times more sales. Maybe it's 3 times. I don't remember exactly my statistics, but what they're saying essentially is, if you foster a company where you value your people and you run your operations well, you do much, much better than any other type of model.
That's interesting in the sense of the stats that you provided and the overall census out there in regards to how a company can become more competitive and more profitable by having this we culture mentality. And it's also interesting, because I want to tap into that later in regards to the mentality of the commodity. But what's particularly interesting is that this kind of basically leads into the following question, which is, one of the items that I wanted to touch upon, in which you've started to lead into, is there's this concern, which we've touched into a little bit, but also depending on which side of the fence you're on, is this call for belonging and the workplace. And you phrase it as the employee's user experience. This was actually during our prep time that you had phrased this. So why is belonging and the employer's employees' user's experience so important?
During COVID, we discovered ourselves. I'm not sure how long ago Malta started their shutdown, but 3 years ago, March. That's a long time. And I remember being very cognizant of COVID in November of that year. So some countries, China and the Eastern Asian countries, they've been in it for 3.5 years probably. So during COVID, people discovered what they needed. Coming to work and just coming to work to get a paycheck and going home because they were unhappy in their workplace. It was tough. And managers needed to really get a sense of what was going on in those people's lives. Not just the work, adapting to the work, but adapting to the home situation world over, but definitely in Canada. They were on lockdown and people were they were homeschooled in the sense that they were on Zoom at school at home, which meant that parents were now taking care of their children during the day while trying to be at work. And essentially, they found out that it was important. There were values that were important. And belonging is one of those. To me, it's a strong feeling. When people feel a sense of belonging, they feel loyal. When they're loyal, they feel more engaged and more productive. These are great values. And what I've learned over the course of the years, and particularly heightened during COVID, is people remember not what you say, but how they feel. So long after words are shared, it's that feeling. And I know when I have memories that are positive, those feelings are so deep. And it is that sense of belonging, of feeling valued. And so, as I said, I love to really support and help organizations with their DEI. And it's now people add B. Because it is when you feel you belong somewhere, you are connected, you will want to stay longer. And we talked about profit. When you treat people better, that they feel like they're part of this organization, part of a family, they are loyal, they'll want to stay.
Yeah, I really like what you said there. It's not what you say, but how they feel. How they feel about the particular, I would say about how they feel about what you've said and how they feel about the actions that you have taken, based on frankly how the opposing person feels about how things should be and how things should be moving forward. And it creates that, again, it can create that positive or negative user experience, which then of course impacts that employees or the employees' overall behavior in the company, whether they're going to be valued or be productive or see themselves in that company even in the near future.
And that's what they're saying. They're saying that there was a report, and they just put out a report in 2023, but I haven't read it yet, so I can't comment on it. But it's HR McLean and Company, and they said that in 1922, the number one thing that most HR companies are working on, same as 2021, is recruiting. And that makes sense because people are, great resignation. People are leaving because they're not happy where they are, or they get a better opportunity or more salary. The number two thing in 2021 was manager training. And for me, manager training is about people's leadership training, because managers needed to learn how to communicate much more effectively, and we're challenged in the pandemic times to be more attuned to listening, to being more empathetic, to being observant about whether staff were upset, unsettled, pick out all those signs. And that shifted to third place in 2022. But what replaced it from number 2 position to 3 was the employee user experience. It moved from 5 in 2021 to number 2 in 2022. So as I said, I haven't read the 2023 report. It just came out earlier this week. What it's saying is that during COVID, as we stayed home and we learned about things about ourselves, we realized, what is it that drives us? What does it drive us at work? What are we passionate about? So people are now saying, I want to work in a place where I feel valued, I feel wanted, I'm doing things that I really enjoy doing, and I feel like the company sees me as a valuable part of the organization, and they want to help me achieve my challenges for my career. And I don't mean challenges in a negative way. I mean challenges in a way that really promotes your ability to shine in the work that you love and the work that you do.
That's really fascinating, because it talks a lot about some of the things that I've touched upon in past conversations, past podcast interviews and workshops that I've done, that if they employ, well, even before that the reality is that the average person spends 1/3 of their life in employment. That company, the people they spend time with, that becomes a sub-community for them, this little micro-community. It becomes their tribe. And if in that tribe they're not valued, they're not respected, they're not appreciated, then once again, their overall performance is going to drop. And they're immediately looking, especially to that particular 2 points that you pointed out in regards to recruitment and management, they're immediately looking at where is the other tribe, the other community that they can be a part of, where they're going to be valued and appreciated for what they bring into an organization.
I've always said, love what you do, love where you work. And when you stop that, it's time to move on. And in all the jobs I've ever had in my life, there was only once where I worked was not the right fit for me. And I, being a person who wants, in a role in HR where I could make something of it, I tried to make the culture change. I tried to help them be more positive. And then I realized that the senior team was not, they didn't share those values, even though when I was hired they did. And so I said, you have to practice what you preach, Hilda. If you can't enjoy what you're doing any further, then it's time to leave. So I know when people are talking about, a sense of belonging, to me, the culture is definitely one thing. And the other thing is the managers. They are the ones that you see, maybe not every day, but they are the ones you're responsible for the work to be done. So you're going to see them whether you want to or not. But if you feel that your manager is not, that the compatibility with the two of you is there's friction, and it makes it difficult, that's not a place you really want to stay, because it's very unsettling to come to work and think, well, is he in a good mood? Can I talk to him about this? Do I have this sense of trust that whatever I share with him is going to be respected rather than ridiculed or reminded, you didn't do this, 20 years ago. No. The job of a manager is really to help nurture our growth and make us better. I find sometimes if you think the person's not good enough, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're not going to be good enough. But if you think they are good enough, you can help them be better. I do something when I do training. I talk about the role of a manager is to uplift and motivate. And I have these two ladders. One ladder is about skill, and the other ladder is about confidence. When you put that person down in such a way that their confidence is shattered, so is the skill that they have. Whatever that skill was, now they can't do it as well. And then that reduces their confidence, which reduces their capacity for the skill. So as managers, we can really erode somebody's abilities to do the work and their confidence. Conversely, we as managers can build that person's skills. So yeah, maybe they didn't do it quite right, but teach them how to do it better. And when they do it better, they get more confidence. When they get more confidence, they can do it better or learn more. So it's almost like that ability as a managers, we can build confidence and skills, or we can degrade them. And that's a pivotal role. And that's why I love to do manager training, to help managers see their roles and give them the tools and the confidence through that fascination advantage to really build their abilities to be leaders and build their teams again to be leaders, to be productive and contributing team members.
Well, that's incredible, because the analogy that you've put out there and the direct connection between that confidence and how the confidence affects the skills, I can really picture that ladder, and hopefully that becomes a light bulb moment with managers that you're training. I do something similar, which I call the ability formula. And the ability formula, if I remember all the elements now, is that it's confidence plus ability plus competence plus self-esteem. And it's all of those elements that the manager needs to foster within their team or individuals to be able to do that. And if the competence isn't there, and then of course the confidence is not going to be there, then neither is the ability is going to be there as an end result. And of course that has a dramatic impact on the self-esteem. And that's now interesting, because this also taps into, the answer to your question. First of all, March was the same time period for COVID for us as well. And that moment of quiet time and self-discovery really opened the door for the neurodiversity community to come out and flourish in the sense of bringing awareness and advocacy. And one of the key factors in that regards where neurodivergents really felt that they needed to speak up about was the aspect of belonging, was the aspect of their particular user experience as being an employee, and how they've been treated by management and by employers and human resources. So this has really brought out that advocacy. And before I move on to the next scheduled question, I want to come out early then. Hey listeners, I want to share with you not one but two workshops I've put together to bring awareness and uplevel the skills of employers, managers, and human resources. The first workshop aids in building a more inclusive environment in the workplace for neurodivergent talent and in developing the skills of managers to become more engaging with their teams. I geared the second workshop towards providing practical solutions in how to be more inclusive to neurodivergent talent in the recruitment process. You can reach out to me on my website to learn more about these amazing programs. Get what your take in regards to the neurodiversity community and in the workplace, and how even prior to the pandemic and during and post-pandemic, how the atmosphere in the workplace has changed with the HR community and the neurodiverse community.
Okay, the HR community with respect to neurodiversity, or the HR community in general, and then the neurodiversity aspect?
Both.
I think from the HR perspective, prior to COVID, diversity equity or equality and inclusion were important. And many larger corporations were putting that high in the agenda and developing what I'll call the strategies and the framework for developing it. So part of the strategies is knowing your numbers, and embracing, trying to bring in more of the balance in numbers so that you have minorities, you have people who are of what I'll call underrepresented communities, and that can be neurodiversity, it can be LGBTQ, women, people of different minorities in the population. During COVID, I think the challenge became where there was so much going on, and neurodiversity sort of was in the mix, but scrambling to adapt to a hybrid world, and those companies or organizations that needed to be out there, front-facing, emergent type cares, was important. Like, they were just really trying to figure out what they needed to do. So there was a lot of priorities for HR, and HR in some ways was now heard, whereas oftentimes before, HR was, depending on the strength, the visionary insights, and the ability to understand the business side, some HRs were having a seat at the table. Others, where the people that are hired in HR and possibly the philosophy of that organization, HR was a voice not at the table, and a voice that somebody said, we're planning to do this, execute it. And what HR should have been was at the table, because anything that might have been executed has an impact on the people. And so their perspective of that would help the model, the operations, the long-term visioning. And so what you found over the course of those 3 years is more of HR at the table. And those that were the most successful were HR people who understood the business side as well as the people side. And as I said earlier, knew how to be diplomatic, to create that we culture, than the us versus them, to be seen to be on one side of the table or the other side of the table. With neurodivergence, it may have been more challenging in a hybrid workplace for HR to deal with than when everything's physically on site and they can have a conversation with people and see, because they don't phone everybody. When you walk around, you can see, you can feel, but when you're working remotely from home, it's a little bit more challenging, right? So it was, I think, challenging for managers who oftentimes they're hired because they have the skills of that particular role that they're playing as managers. They have the expertise in that area, and they probably manage the project well. But their skills to motivate, inspire staff, to help build a strong team and create productivity, they were not necessarily seen as a criteria for hire. They were seen as John's a pretty good, he's really an expert. He's got 20 years of experience in this, and he manages the projects pretty well. But they don't really say how well he is with the people skills. And so I think during COVID, that challenged people who were not as effective in their people leadership skills. And so they even became more handicapped because they may not even observed and been honed into their skills when they're physically on site. Now we're asking them to do it when they're working in a remote situation. So as a result, they may have ended up just missing the boat and not understanding and have that expectation of what a good leader should be. A good leader should make sure you get the work done, right? And I don't care what the sacrifice is to you, your family. And yet during COVID, you needed to be more empathetic, more understanding, and more astute to that. So I think there was a challenge for neurodivergence to come out and share because of it. To understand neurodivergence, you really do need to have that communication with them, and people who aren't skilled in people skills would be even more challenged picking up the cues of a neurodivergent, especially if there's not the eye contact. The words are there, but not necessarily the sentiment or the emotion. And that's the nature of certain people who have neurodiversity as part of one of their challenges. So if you've got a person who doesn't understand how to read people and a person who needs a more in-depth sense of people leadership skills, then this is a recipe for misunderstanding and for lack of support and growth and nurturing.
That really paints a large picture there and really breaks down particular elements. And funny enough, that actually leads into the next question, because you really painted a really good picture there. So here goes. Through past interviews, I've touched upon some topics from research and seminars on the fact that HR is being seen as a dumping ground by management. There is an insufficient understanding of how to support neurodivergent talent. Or when HR is asked who are the most problematic managers, they can count and name them automatically. This, of course, leads to conflict, and that is an overall lack of awareness and training given to both management and human resources. On this point, in our prep talk, you had mentioned an interesting statistic on managers and when managers are hired and when they get their training. Can you share that stats and provide the reasoning behind that gap?
Okay, so when we were talking pre the taping, I shared with you that the average age of a person becoming a manager, and I believe this is a frontline manager, is 36 years of age. Some industries might have a different set, particularly IT. They get there earlier. But this study, 36 years. The average age that managers get training is 40. That's 4 years. 4 years of learning their leadership skills, of dealing with people by trial and error and by their own self-study. Some managers are not into the people side of their responsibility and role as a manager. They're focused on the skills and the project, but not the people. So that's a lot of trial and error. That's a lot of ingrained routine that they may say, this is who I am, you can't change me now. And the reason for that gap is number one, recognition of the value and the crucial role that managers play in building the business, because those managers are responsible for the projects running smoothly, of client satisfaction, and of hiring and training their staff. So when somebody leaves, they have to bring somebody on, another person, and train them. And they don't realize that if you spent more money in training people to be better people leadership, in their people leadership role, then you would have a lower recruitment replacement rate. You'd have people staying on and building their abilities and skills. So if you spent the money, it's worth it. But a lot of people will say, okay, we only have so much budget. Education is not necessarily a key part of it. And oftentimes the education is actually provided for senior people, senior team to learn how to be more effective in strategic planning and business operations and marketing or whatever, and less budget at the middle manager and the frontline manager. And so this is where that 4-year gap comes in, because there's not enough budget. And in times of recession or streamlining, education is usually cut off, right? So, and who's going to get cut off first? It's not the executive's budget for education. It'll be the frontline manager and the middle manager.
That's really interesting because the focus is obviously in their mindset that it's about business development. It's about the upper management and growing the business, where they're the ones who need to get the most training. And there's this misunderstanding that it's actually the frontline managers, the foot soldiers who need the training the most to be able to develop and coach and nurture their team members and their employees, and to be able to retain their employees, so that the company overall can produce and provide those products and services in a very effective and profitable manner.
I think part of it is people really, good organizations who value their employees will understand what I'm talking about. But those companies that don't value will see the money not spent well. And yet they don't understand the statistic is that when you treat people as a commodity and you think about this cost of doing business, we're going to replace somebody, it's not a dollar for dollar replacement. Like, you use the amount of $40,000. Yeah, let's use euros since we're talking to a Malta and other audience. For 40,000 euros, the cost of replacing that person isn't 40,000 euros. It's actually, at a technical admin level, it's 1.5 times the salary. So it's a 60,000 euro investment to replace, because there's the salary, but then there's the cost of hiring, the cost of other people filling in the work, and then the cost of productivity. That person you hire may take 4 weeks to replace. And then when that person comes, are they going to be functioning at the same productivity level as the person that left? No. And it will take them a while. When you look at higher levels, it takes more time. If you're hiring a senior sales rep, and let's say they're making 120,000, it can be actually 2 to 2.5 times more. Because think about all the things I said, but how long will it take you to find that senior salesperson? A lot longer than, a technical entry-level person. It will also take that person to ramp up. And if they're in a sales position, are they going to bring in 10, 20,000 euros a month in sales that the other person who had his whole, been around the company for 2 or 3 years? No, it will take him 3 months, 6 months, a year to ramp up to the level of that person. Hence, you can see how that amount could be 2.5 times to the overall cost of the operations. So when people treat people as commodities to be replaced, they're not thinking of the cost of investment and of people leaving. They're not thinking of the cost of bringing in an HR person to help you build your culture. And because that investment actually saves money in the long run.
I quite often say, and I actually did a recent workshop about the importance of metrics. And you had in fact, in the recent workshop, there was an overall majority who understood it and trying to get them to intake the principle. But of course, there was always this minority that didn't quite get it. And you've highlighted the importance, as I did, about understanding the metrics that are in play and understanding how those metrics are going to determine the overall impact that a company is going to be able to achieve and be able to be competitive, be more profitable, and to be able to retain good talent. And overall, majority of people don't want to do the metrics. And I was talking to another consultant last year where she was talking to a bunch of HRs, and they just, about a particular problem, and their automatic response was, it's just much easier to fire them. It was just, and it's quite, and you painted quite well that they're obviously seeing them as a commodity, rather than seeing them as people and understanding the user experience and creating that we culture. And you can see that as being an overall problem, as you've painted, that is quite widespread.
Right.
When the right culture is not properly established. And this is why I wanted to come back and talk about this, because this attitude and mentality of how managers and companies and even human resources treat people as a commodity, it has such a negative impact. And it's also interesting, where you juxtapose or actually gave the actual numbers, what that really is. And there are similar numbers that has come out, and that I use when it comes down to providing reasonable accommodations. So, there's a study out there where they went out to disprove the cost for providing reasonable accommodations for someone who's neurodiverse versus firing them, recruiting someone new, and training that new person. And the total cost of providing reasonable accommodations versus going through the hiring and firing and retraining process was 7% of that. So in actuality, it's cost savings to create that we culture and to provide reasonable accommodations than to spend double, if not triple the amount that it needs to be spent.
I think part of the thing is that a lot of people are not good in communicating effectively, right? And that goes for people who are staff and people who are managers. There almost is an avoidance of uncomfortable conversations. And I think when people have challenges, whether it's mental health or diversity or even LGBTQ2, when people don't understand those other people, they don't know how to communicate, they don't work on developing effective communication skills. And so sometimes they think it's just easier to bring me something instant. And I remember when we would hire staff, and we would not just look for abilities. You can always teach people skills and abilities. What you need to do is hire for a philosophy, a belief that's similar to yours, and hiring for fit. And I don't mean homogeneous fit, because we can all be diverse in our thinkings, and that adds to the team. But you want to make sure the fundamental beliefs are there. Like, do people believe that, we want to create a healthy work culture? That may be one premise. The other might be that we treat all people, equal and valued. So whatever we choose the beliefs, you want to make sure those people fit. Because when you have somebody who doesn't fit, it really creates tension, and people avoid talking to those kinds of people. So it is important. And I want to emphasize, when you're looking for a position, look for a company that cares about people and cares, if that's important to you, which it's important to me. And I think for a person who's neurodiverse, you want to find an organization that really believes, not lip service, but really believes in DEI. And so what you need to do is not just drill down at, do they have a strategic plan? Do they have these committees? But how are they living, eating, and breathing DEI? And I think that, to me, inclusivity is key, because that's practical, and belonging is feeling, right? Diversity is a mix. Equality and equity, often people just look at that in terms of numbers. But it's, how do we create inclusive work cultures? And that's teaching people, that's training people to be open, to listen, and to be respectful of other people's unique differences. And when we are open and supportive, we can create a place of inclusivity and belonging. Too many people will share that, they are hired because they are the neurodiverse one, or the black person, or the whatever, but they don't have a voice. Somebody who says, hey, finally made it, I'm at the senior table. And when they give an idea, that idea just seems to go into one ear and at the other, and there isn't a feeling of people listening to them. And yet they'll say, but somebody else then rephrases my idea, and all of a sudden, hey, that's a great idea, let's go with that. And no credit now is given to that person who came through. And that's sending a message to that individual. You're here for the number, but we don't want you, we don't really listen to what you have to say because we don't value it. That's a message people are sending.
Yeah, very true, very true. It's very well said. I mean, the only thing I would add to that in a little bit of a counter is when we talk about being a fit, the aspect comes down to, is cultural add. Are you having a cultural add mentality? And if you're going to have a cultural add mentality, then that means you need to bring the awareness and the training so that those individuals can adapt and understand that new person or a group of people who are a cultural add. Otherwise, then you're going to get into this not a good fit situation.
Yeah. And I want to reinforce what you said, because when I said fit, I didn't mean homogeneous fit, right? I think your terminology, cultural add, is a much more accurate way of saying fit, because fit doesn't mean homogeneous. You don't want everybody thinking like you. What you want is, you want people who are adding to the culture, they're adding value, they're giving fresh ideas. Fresh ideas in this time of post-COVID really should be valued. Diversity in mind and thinking should be valued, because those companies that will survive aren't the ones that are going back to pre-COVID days. They're thinking, how do we move forward? And, when reports are saying you need to think about how you will be embracing a much more employee experience than you did before. Those people that want to go back to pre-2020, they're not going to survive, because what we were in 2020, we are different people. We have different needs as employees, as parents, as family people. We need and want different things now. And it behooves all of us, whether in the workplace or in our own personal lives, how do we evolve and how do we want to go forward? It's kind of giving people a new start. I won't call it fresh, because, and maybe it is fresh, because it is different. It is totally different. I actually had a post the other day where somebody posted and said, ineffective leaders are people who don't have open ideas. And it was just a little kind of poster. And it came to me on a Friday night, and I thought, this is exactly what I fight for. We don't need ineffective managers. We need effective managers. So I said, wow, this has pushed my hot button, and proceeded to share 3 paragraphs about ineffective managers, effective managers, uplifting and motivating. And by the time I went to bed, I had over 40,000 impressions of people who'd seen it. And today is 5-6 days later, 75,000 people have seen my post, and comments like, this is the truest post I've ever read. Yeah, this has happened to me. So it's pushed a lot of hot buttons. So many people feel that they are not being working with effective leaders that are really contributing to the benefit of the company, to the benefit of them as individuals. And so I'm going to be on another rant soon about ineffective leaders and effective leaders. And I really appreciate our conversation, Joseph, because you are asking such deep questions about what our industry, my industry, needs to do. And some of us are doing it. Some of us are not doing it. Some of us are fighting to get a seat at the table to do it. My passion is to help people understand that having effective managers that can communicate effectively with all types of people, that rev up concept, treat people with respect, look at them as equals, value who they are, and then look at the uniqueness of those people and tap into that potential. And I help foster that in managers so they can be more confident. And then I help them see that in their staff. And this was the recipe for success my husband and I had that created a top 10 best workplaces. And so now I started my own company after we sold the engineering company. And that's my passion. I want to help as many companies, as many individuals, as many managers as possible to be better managers and to really make a difference to organizations, to workplaces, and to the people and leaders of that workplace.
Well, fantastic, because you really led right into the next question, which is you started to break that down, and you through the whole entire interview you've tapped into quite a lot of that. So that philosophy of rev up, you've given a very good explanation. How can other companies? I mean, first off, let me break that down a little bit more. Can you first off break down the rev up philosophy, and second of all, how can human resources, other professionals such as yourself, embrace and implement that philosophy?
I think the philosophy is not a difficult concept, right? When you think about it, the first three are decent human being values: respect, equality, and value. And in an organization, respect doesn't mean how I think you should be respected. It's understanding individuals and how they feel they should be respected, right? So it means getting to know people and developing trusting relationships. The equality piece is looking at people as equally valuable as anybody else. So yes, we have hierarchies, but each one of us plays an invaluable role. And if you think about it, think of soccer. You've got forwards, you've got goalies, you've got mid people, and you've got the defense. Well, what if you didn't have any defense people? Right? The point is that it isn't the goalies that should shine or the forwards. It is each one of those people is a super caliber expert at the field that they're playing. And if we nurture their skills and abilities, we can have a high performance team, and we can have a winning team, a World Cup maybe. But the point is that when you look at people as not equality, to me is your role is equally important as my role. And without that, we're not going to move forward as a successful organization. And then to me, the distinguishing features is the uniqueness and potential. When you look at individuals and you see what their skills are, then nurture those, build those, make those shine, then you are tapping into the potential of that person. Isn't it gratifying to know that you've got this within you, somebody helped build that? And then that makes you feel like you belong, feel valued, and then you want to contribute. So it's a wholesome set of values. I wrote a chapter in this book, and I talk about rev up and leadership, and I want to share that. So people who want to embrace a rev up approach really can just learn those set of values. I have a training program that hones that in and practices that in a more communicative way. How do we put that concept into practice? The ladder I told you about, uplifting and motivating. And then I use this fascination advantage tool. And what I love about this tool is it's similar and complementary to ones about DISC and Strength Finders Myers-Briggs. But the uniqueness of fascination, and that's why I chose it, is that it looks at how the world sees you, not how you see the world. And there are 7 languages like creativity, it's called innovation and passion and alert, mystique. Each one of us gets identified 2 of the major languages. And when you speak the languages, your superpowers, then you actually show confidence and authenticity. And when you do that, people build trust. And so through that and my training, I really help build a manager's strengths and their confidence level, and then apply the rev up process to building a much more inclusive workplace. That's if you embrace the rev up approach, and you don't get shy about confronting awkward conversations, you can build a much more inclusive organization that helps foster belonging.
Well, that's really superb, and thank you for sharing that. So my last question to you then, Hilda, is how can my audience get in touch with you, and in particular, get more information about the training program that you mentioned?
So I am on LinkedIn, and if people just go into LinkedIn, Hilda Gan, that doesn't have any numbers behind there. My website is www.peoplebright, that's BRIGHT consulting.com, and you'll find all the resources there, the training program, about 50 different webinars on a variety of aspects of people management, mental health. So I think those are the primary two ways that people can get a hold of me.
Well, that's...
and they can follow my podcast called Rev Up Your Potential. Surprise, surprise. And it's on YouTube and Apple, Spotify, so you can listen to it audio or you can see it. But that's where you'll really also get a chance to get to know me a bit better.
Absolutely fantastic, Hilda. Well, Hilda, I'm sure that there's much more that we can talk about, but we've reached the end, and I want to thank you for being such a great guest and for sharing your insight into human resources. I also want to thank you, my continued listeners, for your amazing support of this podcast. I also encourage you to continue to support this podcast so I can bring you more amazing content. You can do so by visiting my Patreon page, where you can connect with me more directly with several options. Till next time, take a leap and transform.